The internet has condemned King Laius for a horrific crime, a monstrous act against his own daughter's story that spread like wildfire across forums, social media, and video essays. It's a narrative that paints him as a complete monster, a simple footnote in the grand, tragic story of his son Oedipus, defined by a single, unspeakable sin. But what if I told you that this accusation is a modern invention, a lie? A complete fabrication that hides a far more ancient, and in many ways, a far more shocking truth. The real story of King Laius isn't about the rape of a daughter he never had. The true myth, the one told by the ancient Greeks themselves, is a chilling tale of a violated trust, a catastrophic betrayal of sacred laws, and a curse so powerful it doomed his entire bloodline for generations. In this video, we're going to unravel the lie. We'll dig into the ancient texts, confront this modern misconception head-on, and piece together the tragic and true story of the King of Thebes. A story that begins not with a daughter, but with a boy, a chariot, and a crime that would echo through eternity. Before we get to the heart of ancient Thebes, we need to address the elephant in the digital room, the story that King Laius raped and murdered his own daughter. It's a powerful, horrifying image. And for many, it's the only thing they know about him, other than being Oedipus's ill-fated father. So where did this story even come from? The answer, frustratingly, seems to be nowhere. At least, nowhere in the classical sources that form the bedrock of Greek mythology. I've spent countless hours combing through the works of the great tragedians Aeschylus, Euripides, and of course, Sophocles, the master of the Theban cycle. I've checked the summaries of mythographers, the histories, the fragments of lost plays. And in all of these ancient records, there is a deafening silence. There's no mention of a daughter of Laius, much less one who suffered such a terrible fate. His only known child, whose destiny is forever tied to his own, is his son, Oedipus. So, if the ancients didn't tell this story, who did? The most likely culprit is the internet itself. It's a digital game of telephone where information gets twisted as it passes from person to person, from a blog post to a tweet, from a wiki entry to a YouTube comment. Greek mythology is especially vulnerable to this. Its stories are already filled with violence and betrayal. Think of Zeus and his affairs, Cronus devouring his children, or Oedipus unknowingly marrying his mother. In a world this lurid, a story about Laius raping a daughter doesn't seem out of place. It feels true, and in the economy of online information, feeling true is often enough to become true. The lie spreads because it's simple. It reduces a complex character to a single, easily digestible crime. Laius becomes shorthand for the king who raped his daughter. It's a neat label that requires no more thought. But this simplification doesn't just butcher the truth. It robs the real myth of its power. The real story isn't about a simple monster. It's about a flawed, tragic man whose calculated act of cruelty sets in motion one of the most devastating narratives in Western literature. The real myth is about hubris, that arrogant pride that leads a mortal to defy the gods. It's about xenia, the sacred duty of hospitality, and the terrible consequences of violating it. And it is about miasma, a spiritual pollution, a stain that can taint not just a person, but an entire family and a whole city for generations. The lie about Laius and a daughter is a shocking but shallow puddle. The truth is a dark and bottomless ocean. And it's into that ocean we're going now. To understand the curse that shattered the House of Thebes, we have to go back to the beginning before Laius was a king, a husband, or a father. We have to go back to his time as an exile, a guest in a foreign land, where he was given sanctuary and repaid that kindness with a betrayal that would enrage the gods themselves. The story of the curse on Laius's house begins, like so many Greek tragedies, with a fight for power, Before Laius could be king, he was a prince in trouble. After his father's death, the throne of Thebes was usurped, and the young Laius had to flee for his life. He found refuge in the kingdom of Pisa, at the court of the powerful King Pelops. We have to pause here to understand how serious this was in the ancient world. Laius wasn't just a refugee, he was a guest under Pelops's roof, a relationship governed by xenia, the sacred law of hospitality. This wasn't just about good manners, it was a divine contract overseen by Zeus himself. A host had to provide food, shelter, and protection to a guest, and the guest had to show respect and do no harm to the host's family. To violate xenia was to invite the wrath of the gods. King Pelops honored this duty. He welcomed Laius into his home and trusted him with a great honor. Pelops had a beloved illegitimate son named Chrysippus, a beautiful young man who was the king's favorite. Pelops tasked Laius with teaching the boy how to drive a chariot, to train him as a warrior and a prince. Imagine the scene, the sun-drenched fields, the young Prince Chrysippus, full of life, standing in the chariot. Next to him, the exiled Laius, a man who had lost everything, now a guest in this land. Day after day, they would have trained together, forging a bond of trust between teacher and student. But in Laius's heart, something dark was growing. Was it a predatory lust for the beautiful boy? A twisted grab for power by a man who had been made powerless? Or the ultimate act of hubris, a belief that he was above the laws of gods and men? Whatever the reason, Laius made a fateful choice. During a trip to the Nemean Games, where Chrysippus was set to compete, Laius abducted the young prince, his student and the son of his protector. He carried him off to Thebes, where the usurper kings had died, leaving the throne vacant and there. In the city he was now set to rule, Laius raped Chrysippus. This wasn't just a personal crime, it was a cosmic one. It was a violation of his duty as a teacher and guest, a betrayal of King Pelops's trust, and a profound act of hubris that shattered the sacred laws of xenia. The act was so severe that the universe itself demanded payback. The aftermath was tragic. In some versions of the myth, the shamed Chrysippus takes his own life. But regardless of how Chrysippus died, the consequences for Laius were sealed. When word of the crime reached King Pelops, the grieving father laid a terrible curse on the man who betrayed him. He prayed that Laius would have a child, and that this child would be the instrument of his own destruction, that Laius would be killed by his own son. Some say it was Pelops who uttered the curse, others blame the goddess Hera. But the source is less important than the substance. A dark cloud of miasma, of spiritual pollution, now hung over Laius. He had returned to Thebes, not as a triumphant king, but as a man marked for doom. He had his throne back, but in taking it, he had sown the seeds of his own ruin, and the destruction of his entire family. The crime against Chrysippus was complete. The curse was in motion, and the stage was set for an even greater tragedy. Laius returned to Thebes a king, but a haunted one. He wore the crown, but the weight of his crime and Pelops's curse were his constant companions. He married a noble woman, Jocasta, but the curse was a poison in his family tree, and for years, they remained childless. Maybe this was a mercy from the gods. If Laius had no son, the curse couldn't be fulfilled. But the pressure to produce an heir was immense. So, Laius did what any great figure did when faced with a question of destiny. He journeyed to the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi to consult the oracle. He asked the god for a child. The oracle's response was a terrifying warning: do not have a child. In some versions, the warning is even more specific. The only way to save Thebes is for Laius to die childless. In the more famous version by Sophocles, the oracle lays out the full horror. If Laius fathers a son, that son is destined to kill him and marry his own mother, Jocasta. This was the curse of Pelops, Now given a divine stamp of approval, the path was clear. Laius had to remain childless to save himself and his city. He returned to his palace a man trapped by fate and resolved to stay away from his wife. Made a critical error. He didn't tell her why, leaving Jocasta confused, rejected, and desperate. Here, the myth pivots on a moment of very human weakness. One night, Laius got drunk. His resolve crumbled. Some say Jocasta, wanting a child, deliberately got him drunk to seduce him. Others say it was simply a moment of drunken passion. The outcome was the same. Laius lay with his wife, and in that single night of forgotten fear, Jocasta conceived a son. The prophecy was no longer a threat, it was a countdown. The baby in Jocasta's arms was a living embodiment of Laius's doom. The king faced a terrible choice: let the child live and accept his own murder, or commit another monstrous act to erase the consequences of the first. Laius, who had already sacrificed morality for his own desires, chose to fight the prophecy. He decided to outsmart the gods. This decision, born of fear, would not prevent the tragedy. With terrible irony, it became the very mechanism that ensured the prophecy's fulfillment. We are now at the heart of the tragedy. A king, a queen, and a baby marked for death. The decisions made in the next few moments will seal the fate of everyone involved. If you want to see how this web of fate tightens and uncover more hidden truths from Greek mythology, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what comes next. A boy was born. For Laius, it was the chilling confirmation of the oracle's prophecy. Fear drove him to an act of appalling cruelty, a desperate gamble to rewrite the future. He and Jocasta decided they had to get rid of the child. To avoid the guilt of spilling kindred blood, they turned to a cruel but common practice: exposure. They would leave the baby on the desolate slopes of Mount Cithæron to die. But Laius, haunted by fear, took an extra brutal precaution. To ensure the baby couldn't crawl to safety, he took a spike and pierced the infant's feet, binding them together. This mutilation, meant to seal the child's fate, would instead give him his name. Years later, he would be known as Oedipus, which means swollen foot, a constant reminder of the parents who tried to discard him. Laius then gave the infant to a loyal shepherd with orders to leave the child on the mountain to die. With that, Laius believed he had outwitted the gods. The son who was meant to kill him was gone. He could finally live in peace. But the chain of fate is often forged with links of human pity. The shepherd took the baby to the mountainside, but he couldn't bring himself to leave the crying, mutilated infant to die. He couldn't kill the child, but he also couldn't bring him back to Thebes. Just then, another shepherd appeared, one from the distant city of Corinth. The Theban shepherd, seeing a way out, gave the infant to the Corinthian shepherd. This shepherd brought the baby back to his own city and presented him to the childless king and queen Oedipus and Merope, who adopted the foundling as their own. They named him Oedipus and raised him as the beloved prince and heir, never telling him he was not their biological son. And so, the great irony was set in motion. Laius's son was alive and well, growing up in a royal court, completely unaware of his true parents. One day at a banquet, a drunk taunted Oedipus, yelling that he was not his father's real son. Though his parents denied it, the seed of doubt was planted. Unsettled, Oedipus sought answers from the oracle of Delphi, the same oracle his true father had consulted years before. He asked the Pythia about his parents, but the god gave him no answer. Instead, the oracle gave him a horrifying new prophecy, the same one given to Laius. He was destined to kill his own father and marry his own mother. Terrified, and believing Polybus and Merope were his parents, Oedipus made a drastic decision. To protect them, he resolved never to return to Corinth. He fled from the people he thought were his family, and the home he thought was his birthright. And in fleeing his supposed fate in Corinth, he ran directly into the arms of his real fate, which awaited him on the road to Thebes. The father who thought his son was dead, and the son who thought his father was in another land were now on a collision course. Every action they took to avoid the prophecy only drew the net of destiny tighter. Laius, the aging king of Thebes, was troubled again. A monstrous creature, the Sphinx, was terrorizing his kingdom, stopping all travelers on the road and posing a riddle. Those who couldn't answer were killed. The city was in a state of siege. Desperate, Laius decided he must once again consult the oracle at Delphi. He set out from Thebes in his chariot, a king on a royal pilgrimage. Meanwhile, Oedipus, fleeing his own prophecy, was walking the roads of Greece. By a cruel twist of fate, he chose the very road Laius was taking. He was heading toward Thebes, the one place in the world he should have avoided. Their paths converged at a place known as the Cleft Way, a narrow pass where three roads met. What happened next wasn't a dramatic clash of fated enemies. It was a banal, petty, and tragically human dispute. Laius's herald, seeing a lone traveler blocking the way, arrogantly ordered Oedipus to step aside. Oedipus, a proud young man who believed himself a prince, refused. An argument broke out. Tempers flared. It was a simple, pointless conflict over the right of way. But pride is a dangerous thing. Laius, enraged by this insolence, leaned out of his chariot and struck Oedipus with his whip. It was a fatal mistake. Oedipus, who had a notoriously short temper, exploded in a rage. He retaliated with furious strength, struck the king his own father and killed him. In the chaos, he killed Laius's entire retinue, except for one servant who escaped. It was over in moments. To Oedipus, this was just a violent encounter, a matter of self-defense. He had no idea of the magnitude of what he had just done. He left the bodies where they lay and continued toward Thebes, the city whose king he had just unknowingly murdered. The first half of the prophecy was now fulfilled. Laius, the king who violated sacred laws and tried to murder his own child to cheat a prophecy, died in a dusty, ignominious roadside brawl. Killed by the very son he had tried to destroy, his story was over, but the curse he had brought upon his house was only just beginning to unfold. So, let's circle back to where we started. The internet's accusation that King Laius raped his daughter. As we've seen, this story is a phantom, a modern fabrication with no basis in the ancient myths. The classical sources are clear. Laius's great crime, the act that set the entire tragedy in motion, was the abduction and rape of the young prince Chrysippus. This was a catastrophic violation of xenia, the sacred bond between guest and host. It was this act of *hybris* that brought a divine curse upon his bloodline. A curse confirmed by the oracle at Delphi, that he would be killed by his own son, who would then marry his own mother. Everything that followed was a direct result of this initial sin and Laius's desperate attempts to escape its consequences. His decision to expose his infant son, Oedipus, wasn't the start of the story, but a frantic reaction to a fate he had brought upon himself. With chilling irony, every step he and Oedipus took to avoid the prophecy only guided them to their fated meeting at the crossroads. The real story of Laius is infinitely more complex and profound than the modern lie. It's a cautionary tale about pride, the futility of trying to outwit the gods, and the inescapable nature of consequences. The horror of Laius's real crime makes the fabricated one feel almost redundant. The truth is already as shocking as any lie. Which leads to a final question. What does it say about our modern storytelling that we feel the need to invent new horrors for these ancient figures? Is the truth of their flawed, tragic humanity not compelling enough? And what does it say about us that we're often so quick to believe and spread the simplified lie? rather than explore the complicated and often more meaningful truth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.